Today, let us take some time to study the Word of God together with the sermon titled Holy Worship. Worship is a ceremony given to God's people as a holy duty, and it is a way to express reverence toward God. Therefore, if one does not offer worship to God, their life of faith cannot be considered a true life of faith. In the Bible, God gives us the holy commandments, such as fearing God and loving Him with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our soul, and with all our strength. God let us know it is a virtue for the true people of God to obey these commandments correctly. Therefore, worship must never be abolished under any circumstances. What does the Bible teach us regarding this matter? Through the examples in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, God already let us know the correct way and direction we must take. Therefore, let us always follow God's guidance so that all of us can enter the everlasting kingdom of heaven. Let us turn to the book of Daniel, chapter 6, in order to understand the will of God. Chapter 6, verse 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them, so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him, because he was trustworthy, and neither corrupt nor negligent. As we know well, Daniel was selected as one of the 3 administrators in that kingdom during his captivity, and he was entrusted with an important position of ruling over this kingdom. However, since such a prominent position of an administrator was given to Daniel, who was one of the captives brought from Israel, the people of that kingdom were jealous of him and even hated him. For this reason, the people of that kingdom constantly devised ways to incriminate Daniel in order for him to lose his high position. As this was their intention, they came up with a plan saying, since Daniel is a worshiper of God and always offers prayers to God faithfully, let us set up a trap for him by using his faith in God. Even though Daniel was a captive from a different nation, he held one of the highest positions ruling over their kingdom. Therefore, the satraps were extremely jealous of him. Like a proverb that says, a rolling stone replaces a stone that is deeply embedded. Since Daniel was a diligent and faithful person in every aspect, they could not find any reason to incriminate him. So they devised a plan to attack him through his faith. Let's see how they tried to accuse him in verse 5. Verse 5, it says, finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Unless it has something to do with the law of his God. In other words, unless we use the fact that he keeps the laws of God, there is nothing else with which we can accuse this man. So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce a decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. There were 3 administrators, and Daniel was one of them. The other administrators except Daniel and the 120 satraps, who were their subordinates, all gathered and issued a decree. Anyone who prays to any god, meaning worships any god, or man during the next 30 days, that is, for 1 month, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing, so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. They had the king approve this decree to be in effect for 1 month. In this way, they established a scheme to entrap Daniel. Let's continue with verse 9. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Now when Daniel, what did he do? Learned that the decree had been published. After Daniel learned this decree had been published, did he compromise his faith? This is what I would like you to pay attention to today. If we stop worshiping God, basically, it is to say that we no longer believe in God. Worship is a decree that God has appointed. It is a regulation that God has given, and it is a law that God has instituted. This is why we must not change the way we worship God according to our own discretion. Let's continue with verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. Daniel's worship and prayer toward God did not change whether it was before he learned that the decree had been issued or after he had learned about the decree. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or man except to you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Even though Daniel knew the decree had been issued, he continued worshiping God and praying to God exactly the way he had been doing before. His faith did not waver at all. Isn't prayer a part of worship? A part of sacrifice? Praising God, praying to God, and sharing words of God are all part of worship. Because of Daniel's unwavering faith, he was punished by the law of that kingdom. Even though Daniel was placed in this miserable situation by being thrown into the lion's den, no harm came to him. Seeing his faith, God prevented the lions from attacking him by shutting the mouths of the hungry lions. King Darius loved and cared for Daniel dearly, so he could not sleep at all that night, and he got up early in the morning to find out if Daniel had survived. Since an edict had already been issued, King Darius had no choice but to punish him, according to the edict, to fulfill his duty as an executor. Early that morning, he went near the lion's den and called out to Daniel. He said to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. In verse 24, it is written, "At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones." According to the book of Romans, chapter 15, what happened in the past is written to teach us, isn't it? What happened to Daniel is a lesson for us. Daniel always lived a life of faith by offering prayers to God and faithfully worshiping God, that is, offering sacrifices to God. Regardless of the king's decree, Daniel's life of faith remained exactly the same. His faith did not waver, nor did his actions change at all. Therefore, I hope all of us will engrave on our hearts once again what we must learn in this age through Daniel's faith, as it is written in the book of Daniel, chapter 6. While thinking about why God recorded the history of Daniel in the Bible, let us inscribe on our hearts the lesson that God wants to teach us. Let's read John chapter 4. We can find Jesus' teaching regarding worship in John chapter 4, verse 20. Chapter 4, verse 20. "Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks." Nowhere in the Bible does it teach that we should stop worshiping God or abolish the worship service if we claim to believe in God. In John chapter 4, verse 23, it is written, "Yet a time is coming and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks." Father is seeking these people. God is seeking those who worship Him in spirit and in truth, so that He can grant them salvation, give them blessings, and eventually lead them to heaven. That is why it says in verse 24, "God is spirit, and His worshippers, meaning worshippers of God, must worship in spirit and in truth." Let's turn to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 35. It says, "So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded." You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what He has promised. Here, it is written that we need to persevere. Why do we need to persevere? We need to persevere in doing the will of God. After doing the will of God, we will receive what God has promised as an inheritance. When we look at Jesus' teaching recorded in Matthew chapter 24, He also emphasized the matter of worship during the time of distress in the last days. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. What do you think Jesus was concerned about in regards to the Sabbath day? He was concerned about us keeping worship. Isn't the Sabbath the day when we honor and worship God? Jesus was worried that worship would be neglected in the time of trouble. That is why Jesus emphasized the importance of worship indirectly by saying, "Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath." Can't we find this recorded in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 24? We must always think, God has always been with us, even in the midst of calamity and difficult situations. What is God's will for putting us in these situations? Therefore, when we have done the will of God, what are we going to receive? The Bible let us know that we will receive what God has promised us. Even though a decree was issued with the royal seal, that is the king's stamp, how was Daniel's attitude toward worshiping God? It did not change, neither before nor after the decree was issued. There are so many churches in the world, like the sand on the seashore. Hasn't a change of attitude towards worshiping God occurred in those churches because God is not with them? All the disasters that came upon Egypt were for the Egyptian people who didn't believe in God. Those disasters didn't happen in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites, who are God's people, lived. Let's think about this matter once again, and let people around us know it too. When we see all the disasters happening this year, we should preach the Passover, the truth of the New Covenant all the more, and tell people the importance of worship that we offer to God. Worshiping God should be holy, with all our heart and with all our mind. I think there might be some members who have been worshiping God habitually, just because it is a day of worship. However, the Sabbath day worship should never be kept in a habitual manner. We are those who have faith to follow the teachings of the Bible just the way the Bible teaches us. Won't this faith lead us to the path where we can participate in the gracious promise of God? Many unprecedented disasters are taking place around us. Whenever something happens, I always think about the life in the desert. During the period of 40 years in the desert, God could have led the people of Israel through a more comfortable and safer path, like an open highway, and let no one attack them. God could have led them to an easier path. However, God led the Israelites through a more challenging and dangerous path that they had to walk for 40 years, even though it was such a short distance to Canaan. There were many difficulties on their path. God took them down an unexpected path that made them feel like giving up on their journey in the desert. I believe that it is no different today. The eternal kingdom of heaven is drawing near. What is God's will? What path would God want us to take in this situation? What can I do to please God? Please, have a beautiful faith to always fathom the will of God so that you can all enter the eternal kingdom of heaven. By this, I would like to conclude today's sermon. Thank you very much.